You are listening to Para X.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Para X Radio Network. Now, the opening song tonight was Haunted Nursery by Midnight Syndicate. And that's appropriate because we're going to be talking to author David L. Sloan, who has a new book out on our old friend, Robert the Doll. And joining me as my special co-host tonight is one of Robert's biggest fans, Barbara Duncan, one of the hosts of the Paranormal View here on Para X. Hey!
Yay, Robert!
Yes, I know. Get out the pom-poms, and I will stand there with a big old squirt gun to get you guys both away from me. Now, I think we should introduce David, who is not only a prolific author, but he's also a ghost hunter, a ghost historian. He's appeared on or consulted with Sci-Fi's Haunted Highway with Jack Osborne, William Shatner's Weird or What, History Channel's Haunted History, Mysteries at the Museum, Dead Files, HGTV's Ghostly Homes, Travel Channel's Hidden City. It goes on. He knows his stuff, guys. And David, welcome.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
It should be an interesting evening. I honest to God, I have posted banners for the last 100 years since I've had this show, and I've never had a banner get 15 shares. And that might be nothing to some people, but usually 3 or 4 people share the banners. 15 for you and Robert. So
yeah, I'm guessing probably 14 of those were for Robert, and maybe the 15th was my mother. I tell you, Robert, God, he is such a draw, and people, they either love him or they have a great deal of respect for him, and they keep their distance.
That would be me.
Yeah, and I would not be the least bit surprised if there's not some type of technical difficulty tonight.
And, people who did not hear the show from 100 years ago that I did with one of his keepers, for lack of a better word, we got what we were referring to as an EVP, but it's not, because we all heard it, but we didn't know what it was. And we're going to be playing that tonight. And that was very disruptive during that interview. Yeah. And we'll get to that a little bit later, because Barbara also said that you have a theory about he growled. We heard the name Robert a couple of times. Mm-hmm. I'm Robert, and then we heard this kind of, it was almost like a sarcastic growl, if that makes sense. And
like they're not listening to me.
Yeah, or, let me just do this to see if I can scare them a little more. It was one of those things. So she said you had an idea about that. So we'll talk about that when we do the EVP, or the capture. But in the meantime, now I know there's probably like 2 people on this planet who have not heard of Robert the Doll. But just in case for those 2 people, could you explain a little bit about Robert's backstory, but then also fill us in on your interest in Robert and when and why you first met him?
Yeah, well, Robert's he's a doll. He's about the size of a 5 to 6 year old child. He stands 3 feet tall. He's stuffed with a wood wool. He has some deterioration on his face. He's extremely creepy looking. He arrived in Key West sometime around 1904, 1905. He was given as a gift to a young boy. This boy's name was Robert Eugene Otto. He gave his name, Robert, to the doll, went by Gene for the rest of his life. And from a very early age, whenever he got in trouble for something, it's something that kids would get in trouble for, he'd say, I didn't do it, Robert did it. So from an early age, shortly after the doll was created, weird stories were reported. Where the story really caught on and became something of a worldwide phenomena was in the later years, when this boy was a grown man and he continued to blame the doll. People claimed that he was, that he'd fly off the handle. He'd say, I didn't do it, Robert did it. And then after he died, people who encountered the doll talked about the doll moving on his own, doing things that an inanimate object should not be able to do. So that is what has created all the, pretty much all the publicity around the doll. All these people going to see him and experiencing these strange things. You hear about the other haunted dolls. This one is probably the most accessible haunted doll in the world. So there's more people who have a chance to encounter what he does. And as far as how I got involved in, it's been a crazy journey. As you can imagine.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but I moved to Key West back in 1996. And I moved here to start up a ghost tour. I had seen a ghost tour in Scotland. And I went through all the research. I went through the library. I went through the different vaults. And I marked down the different haunted houses and the leads that I had. And I went to a local bed and breakfast called the Artist House, because I had heard about the ghost of Ann Otto haunting there. And I talked to the owner. It was a guy named Daryl Meyer. And I said, I'm here to talk to you about your ghost. And he goes, oh, you want to hear about Robert? Now, I hadn't heard of Robert. I said, well, who's this Robert you talk about? He goes, oh, he's a haunted doll. I thought Daryl was a nut. I thought, okay, haunted doll, here we go. He said, I've still got the room upstairs furnished from when Robert lived there. Would you like to see it? And I paused for a moment, and then the phone flew off the hook and shot out towards me. This is back before cell phones. It shot out towards me. He looked down at it like it was nothing, and I said, yeah, maybe we should go. We started walking up the stairs. The door of a bookcase opened up and almost tried to stop me. And then we went up, and I tell you, he took me. It was a special room up in the attic, and we climbed it up. It was a steep staircase. The door opened up almost as a hatch, and when we got in there were these little chairs and these little couches, like a double-person bench, all doll-sized furniture. And when he said Robert's name, the energy of the room changed. Very negative heat energy. I felt like I was going to throw up. And I told him, I said, great, thanks for showing me. I've got to go. I went back down the stairs, and I thought, there's really something here. And that's when I started my research on Robert. And that was 1996, so about 18 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So even with Robert not in the room at all, it still had that energy level.
It did at that time. The house, it had such a strong energy. And you have to understand, Robert was not on display at the museum at that time. He was locked up in a back room at the museum. The staff knew there was something strange about him. Immediately after going to his room and experiencing that, I contacted the museum and I said I'd like to see the doll. I'd made a phone call to them, and the person who answered the phone said, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's not available today. Why don't you call back tomorrow?" I called back the next day with somebody else. They said, "Oh, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Call back another day." This went on for a while, and eventually they put me in contact with the curator of the museum. It was a girl named Stacy, and Stacy said, "Yeah, come on up, I'll show them to you." And she took him out of their back storage room, and you got to realize where the museum where he's located. It's an old Civil War fort. It's called the Fort East Martello Museum. And Stacy brought him out, set him down on the table, and she was talking to him. She said, "Robert, this is David. He's starting a ghost tour in town. He'd like to take some pictures of you." And, this is just another instance where I thought, okay, this person's crazy. She left the room. We're sitting in a dark room in this old brick fort. I started taking photographs of Robert, and he looked, he's interesting looking. There's a certain creep factor to him just because of his age, but there was nothing that led me to believe, okay, this doll is haunted. I snapped a few pictures, no problem. Keep in mind, this is before digital. This was all with film. And then I decided I was going to take his hat off. He wears a little sailor outfit. I was going to take his hat off so I could get a better picture. When I reached towards his hat, the doll came alive. Now, I'm not saying the doll moved, jumped at me, anything like that, but you could see him change from an inanimate object to an object with a spirit in it. I mean, his eyes took on a certain gleam. There was something there. I grabbed the camera. I said, let me get some shots. I took 3 pictures. None of them went. The camera didn't work. I set the camera down on the table to look at it. Boom, boom, boom. 3 flashes go off. I tried to go up and take a picture of the doll again. It would not function. I swear to you, the doll kind of smirked at me and gave a little giggle.
Whoa. Lots of people have heard him giggle.
Yeah.
That's not unusual from different reports.
No, but if it doesn't happen to you, you think, yeah, right. You think the person is insane or lying.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought. But the weirdest thing, that negative heat energy that I felt at the artist house, the same thing filled the room at the museum when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So is it powerful. That he... Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, is it that, do you think that it's possible that he's able to leave the puppet?
Yes.
The doll?
Without doubt.
Okay.
Okay. I think there's a lot of different forces at work here. And one of the reasons that I started researching Robert early on, and a lot of that research was for the Ghost Tour. So I kept up on him, but it was never the huge passion of, okay, let's find out everything about him. You know, it was, let's find out what's here, let's keep up on the stories. Through the years, the stories started getting stretched. And, you know, any ghost stories involve a certain element of legend. Legends are oftentimes based on fact. But through time, you know, it's like that old game of telephone where, you know, you whisper something into someone's ear down the line, and by the time it gets to the last person, it's nothing like the original statement. And through the years, I found the story of Robert in Key West was going so far from what it originally started as I knew it, that I decided I'm going to find out the truth. And I said, I'm going to reverse engineer every single one of these legends, and I'm going to see what the real deal is. Because there's no mistaking that there's something about Robert. That many people are not going to have something happen without there being something there. And I thought we owed it to both Robert and the Otto family. The Otto family is such a significant part of the story. I thought we owed it to all of them to trace this back and really set the record straight before the stories get too out of hand. And it turned out that the facts are a lot stranger than fiction.
Very true, actually. The origins of the doll itself comes into play because there were stories that it was a doll made specifically for a voodoo purpose.
Right.
As opposed to, a store-bought doll, for example.
Yeah, and you know, the voodoo's always been one of those factors. And for that to come up in every story, I figured there had to be some element of truth to it. One of the things that happened with the story, though, people started saying that there was a slave who was abused by the Otto family, and that they sought revenge on the family by putting voodoo into this doll. One of the things that I discovered, the way I think that story evolved, the doll was actually given to Gene by his mother. His mother was white Bahamian. I believe people said the Bahamian woman gave it to her. And then the Bahamian woman became the black lady. The black lady became the servant. The servant became the slave. It became the Haitian voodoo. You know, it kind of evolved like that. But the interesting thing was, even though it wasn't an angry servant seeking revenge, I did find servants that were related to the Otto family, and one of them I actually believe is the mother of the child that inhabits the doll. That's
even creepier.
Well, it is to a degree. There was, when you look for servants with the Otto family, you know, and I traced everything back, and we went back with the Ottos. Gene Otto, of course, being the boy who was given the doll. His mother would be the one who picked up the doll, and we'll get into where the doll actually came from in a little bit, probably. But Gene's grandfather had a servant, and there's a lot of documentation about his servant. His name was William Abbott, and they were on great terms. There wasn't any animosity. I mean, they were best of friends, and he was so good to the family, in fact, that when Gene's grandfather died, Gene's father hired William to work at his pharmacy. The interesting thing about William Abbott, he had a wife named Emmeline. Emmeline, she's listed in the census records as a washwoman, so she'd do people's laundry. They lived around the corner from the Otto house, so I imagine she would have been involved in the Otto house. She would have visited her husband at the pharmacy right across the street. In the 1900 census, she shows 0 children. In the 1910 census, she shows 0 children living, 1 child deceased. So that means in that 10-year period, she gave birth to a child and lost a child. That's the same time frame when Robert the doll arrived. I'm working on a theory. I don't want to be quoted on this, of course, yet, but I have reason to believe that Jean's father might have been having an affair with her. I don't know if this is their child. I don't know how the child died. I don't know how old the child was when he died. I just know that she had a child. If she was losing that child, the place she would have gone would have been the doctor's house, which would be Jean's father. I believe that child died in that house, and whether the child chose to enter the doll on its own or whether she invoked Voodoo to place the child in the doll so she didn't lose her child, I'm convinced that that is the spirit that's with Robert.
And it makes kind of sense because, as I was talking to Marla earlier, there is in Reiki, when you use dolls for proxy to do distance healing, they often remind you that you have to cleanse the dolls on various occasions because spirits can become attached to dolls because, number one, they're getting all that attention, all of that energy.
So, of course, that's the one place they're going to want to be. So it makes sense that there would be a child inhabiting the doll. I guess my question is, if he can get out of the doll, why would he want to go back in?
Well, there's a couple of theories about that. I mean, one possibility is that the child is trapped within a certain area of the doll. What I really believe, I think when Jean passed away, he came back and his spirit's right near the doll. Mm-hmm. So I think what you're dealing with, you have that a very rare friendship between a boy and a doll. Yeah. It lasted through all of their life. If it was that intense in life, why wouldn't it continue in death? And there's some other very convincing reasons that Gene Otto would be haunting the Fort East Martello. Gene was quite an eccentric guy. He was a brilliant artist. He helped convert the fort. He helped convert the museum of the fort into an art gallery. He started one of the first art galleries there. He had some amazing showings of his own works there. I think he did 3 or 4 showings there where thousands of people came. And Gene also wanted to convert the artist house. That's his home. He wanted to convert his home into a museum to the artist. I talked to one of the neighbors who lives across the street, and this neighbor was really good friends with Anne. And there was some turmoil between Gene and Anne. He was never abusive to her, but he was a little bit cruel with his actions sometimes. But this neighbor across the street said that every spare penny that Gene had, he put into making that house the museum towards him. And he wanted, when he died, to have his hands cast in wax so that the centerpiece of the museum would be the artist's hands. There were some things that happened after Gene died where obviously the home did not become the museum to him, but the place where he had most of his shows, the place that he had most of his time and effort and energy placed into, that would have been the Fort East Martello. So even though he didn't get his own museum, I can see Gene going up there and being with Robert because he'd feel like that's him getting his glory as well. So I think it's a case of the two of them are still there together.
And that would make a lot of sense given the fact that he was so obsessed with the doll that he would want to be around it. I mean, he came back to it.
Yeah, the two are close. And again, it's one of those things. If you listen to some of the legends, they'll make it where the two were inseparable for their entire life. The fact is, when Gene turned, probably 18, 19, when it was time for him to go to school, he went off. He went to Virginia, then he went to New York, and then he spent a considerable amount of time in France. And that's where he met his wife. After he met his wife, they stayed in France until the Great Depression hit. And, everything with the gold standard kind of crashed everybody. But then they went back and they lived in New York for 10 years. It wasn't until 1948 that they returned to the Florida Keys. And when there was a good 20-year period probably that Gene was without the doll. But when he and Ann moved back, and Ann was from Boston, she was a brilliant concert pianist. She gave up her career when they left New York. She was playing at the Rainbow Room. Most people know that is where they film Saturday Night Live now. Rockefeller Plaza. She had done command performances for the King of England. I think Henry V, or George V, one of those. But she was so talented. So she gave up everything, and they moved to Key West. And that's when she met Robert. That's when she saw that room that Gene had set up for Robert. And, you always look at stories, and I tend to be a skeptic. I like to say, okay, this story is being made fantastic. What probably really happened? But when I talked to the neighbor who was great friends with her, he bought the house after Gene died, and I asked him about the doll. He and this neighbor can't stand the doll. He hates what it's done to Ann's good name, because you got to realize she was a very good friend of his, and here you have this incredibly beautiful, talented woman who's being overshadowed by a doll. So the only mention that this neighbor made of the doll, he said, yeah, it was in a cedar chest in the second floor middle room. And I asked Ann, I said, what's up with this? And she said, that doll was Gene's best friend. He never could make any friends of his own. And she implied that she hated that doll.
Wow, that's scary. While we're talking about Robert himself, somebody in the chat room was bringing up a point. I got a private message to talk a little bit about Leo, because the doll has a doll.
Yeah, the doll does have a doll. It's a lion, Leo the lion, and and that name that was actually given by the museum staff. But the doll. The doll's doll, that arrived later on. If you look, there's a tag on Leo the Lion. He's made in Japan by A.D. Sutton & Sons. And they were based out of New York, but he was made in 1964. So he wasn't there at the time the doll was created, but he was there. He was there at the time when Gene was still alive. Gene died in 1974, and just to put things in perspective, Gene Otto was born in 1900. So Leo was there when he was 64 years old, but he was given to the museum with Robert. So we have the original record of donation, and the lion was part of that. And he is somewhat a piece of security for Robert. There's hundreds of people who go up to see Robert every day. There was somebody up there one evening, and she had been drinking. She was taunting Robert. There were about a dozen people around, from what I'm told. Robert threw Leo the lion towards this lady. Robert's encased in glass, so the doll, the lion flew forward, hit the glass. I confirmed it with museum staff. They said, yeah, the next morning, Leo was at the bottom of the case. We had to pick him back up.
Yeah,
but
now.
Why is he in the glass case?
Robert's protected by glass. Well, he's very valuable now.
Sure.
He's arguably the most haunted doll, probably in the world. Annabelle has the movies about her, but a lot of what's happened with Annabelle, that's taking one or two people's word for it. With Robert, there's hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of people who have had encounters. If you go to see Robert, the walls around his case, they just did a renovation. They're a very nice renovation, but they used to have hundreds of letters pinned to the wall. Now they show them on video. I've seen the collection. I've gone through all the letters people write to him. There's probably close to 1,000 letters of people asking Robert's forgiveness. And I used to think a lot of these letter writers were a little bit loony. But then when I started really working on the book in earnest, I gained a new respect for everything about him.
Now, he's played a lot of very interesting games with you, as I understand, while you were writing the book.
Yeah. Probably, when I first started working on the book, and I've been working on the book for 6 years or more, I've been researching the doll for 18 years, but I was working on the book, and I was making good progress on it, and my hard drive crashed. My computer crashed. I was able to recover everything except for the book. When I started working on the book again, and believe me, when you lose a book, it takes a while to start tackling it again. I lost a second hard drive. It happened a third time. The third time I had it backed up. I had a paid subscription service. I had everything in the cloud. I was emailing myself copies of the book. I had 238 pages completed, and my computer crashed again. They recovered everything again except for the book. I went to all of my sources where I had it saved. It was not in any of them.
Wow.
I mean, it's stuff that's, it's just not possible. Yeah. It's really not possible.
Well, here's something that we thought, and I want to get this in, that wasn't possible either, was the sound bite that we got when I was interviewing the lady at the museum about Robert. Now, I'll say that as we were talking, I and Barbara said she heard it too. In the background, we heard what sounded like people trying to taunt or make noise or something. But I didn't understand what they were saying, but people in the chat room also heard it. And
was this when you were talking to Pamela Sieber?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, Pam, and I heard some other stories from her about that night.
Right, and so, I was actually getting annoyed, and we went to commercial break, and I was telling my producer, I said, Mike, what the hell is going on back there? I mean, I said, this is crazy, I said, she says she's alone, and now they're having a party back there, and I mean, it was that bad. And the next morning, my producer got a hold of me and said, oh, no, he was practically dying. He said, you have to hear this. This is what was going on last night. Well, when I listened to it, it kind of gave me goosebumps really bad because there's a voice behind us talking, she and I, that says, Robert, I'm Robert, a couple of things like that. And then this growl. Now, we didn't know what to make of it, but we were dealing at the time with this guy, Ken Arrington, who was at the Haunted Mortuary in New Orleans, which is a very high-tech, ghosty place. I mean, they had all the latest equipment, and everything was, hunky-dory, and we didn't know what to make of it. So we sent this to Ken and said, what do you think? And he got back. I mean, they ran it through all their stuff, and he got back to us, and he said, I don't know what to make of it. He said, but it's not human. Because for people that don't know, like with EVP and stuff, a human voice will be at a certain number of megahertz, from A to B. Something that is not a human voice is on a different frequency. And this voice in this EVP is on that different frequency. So he says, I can't tell you, that it's Robert or a ghost or whatever, but he said, it's not human. So that being said, Sarge, do you have the clip, and can we kind of run it through twice? It's about 30 seconds. But just listen behind me and her, and you'll hear a male voice, and it's fairly clear. They could see the aura. Now, an aura means there's some kind of energy around it. And one of the questions in the chat room is, what is occupying Robert? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm sorry, I can only hear part of what you just said about his aura. What was that?
People are wondering what might be occupying Robert. If he has an aura, there's something in him, some kind of life, right?
That's a very good question. I don't know that
They could see the aura. Now, an aura means there's some kind of energy around it. And one of the questions in the chat room is, what is occupying Robert? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm sorry, I can only hear part of what you just said about his aura. What was that?
People are wondering what might be occupying Robert. If he has an aura, there's something in him, some kind of life, right?
That's a very good question. I don't know that
Yeah, I find it fascinating. And as a good skeptic, anytime that I'm not there, I always say, "What else could that be?" But the thing is, it really, to me, it ties in with what I believe. And I don't believe Robert's the only spirit there, and I don't think he and Jean are the only spirits there. I was just pulling up my notes from when I interviewed Pamela Sieber. That's who you interviewed that night. And I'm looking at the notes now. She says, when she was, she says radio interview with Stirring the Cauldron. She talked about the doors. She said there were doors shaking in the room. And she, let's see, she was nervous. She was sitting by Robert with a sand dollar she had painted for him. She said that Robert started blushing. And then when that happened, and I'm assuming this at the same time, she said the temperature in the room rose 15 degrees.
Oh.
So, I'm guessing, I don't know if you talked to her after the interview. And I know you found that you discovered those noises in the back afterwards. But, so this is all stuff that ties into what you're saying. When I went up in Robert's room at the artist house, and when I first saw him, it was that heat energy, the negative heat energy. So for her to talk about the room temperature rising 15 degrees, because normally when people talk about ghosts, they talk about a chill.
Exactly.
So I've got a couple theories, because that little voice, the voice in the back, I heard something say Robert twice. Right? Is that what you're hearing as well?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And that wasn't any of you, correct?
No, even with the cold that I have now, I don't sound like a man.
That's what I'm thinking.
So, yeah, no, it wasn't me.
And Pamela, she was alone there. There was nobody else with her. So that's interesting. The voice is a little deeper. And then I heard the growl that you're talking about. There's something that happens with spirits, for example, I could go to a local restaurant and I could sit at a certain table and put a glass on that table and I could say, this glass is haunted. At a certain time, this happens to it and the glass moves. And if I had enough people hearing that story and putting their energy into it and believing that, for a long enough period of time, other spirits, even if there was no spirit there originally, other spirits would come in and fill that void. And they'd start doing those things so that they could take on the energy that people were focusing. The spirit world doesn't have enough energy. That's why we don't usually see ghosts. They just don't have the energy to do the things they really want to, so they do it in the easiest way possible. There's at least 2 entities that I'm aware of that are up at the museum, and they hang out around Robert's case. They'll take on the energy of all the people who go up there, because a lot of people want this to be an evil doll or a bad doll. And with all that focused energy, you've got that innocent little boy up there, and he's a kid. Kids don't know how to manage things. I'd imagine that little Robert's kind of freaked out. He's been doing it long enough, he's probably comfortable with it, but there's at least 2 other entities there. And I believe one of them is the one that was letting out that growl. And
go ahead.
Well, and I think also the fact that Robert was said twice, it might have been the two of them talking with each other. It might have been the two entities.
Could have been. I mean, it was really, really interesting. And as I said, the thing that I think all of us kind of went, "Oh, wow," was when we found out that it was not a human voice. You know, everybody's like, "Oh my God, here we go." So that was actually pretty cool. Now, what the other thing that scared the heck out of me the other day was on your website, and I saw that there was a YouTube video of Robert blinking. So, you know, adding insult to injury, I went and I looked at it, and it actually did look like he blinked. But I can't figure that one at all. Barbara had a thought about it, because, you know, for me it's like, okay, this doll has no eyelids. How did it blink? So I'll let you both handle that one.
Yeah, what did you think, Barbara?
Well, I thought maybe it was like a forced perspective where, you know, you could have a difference change in the lighting where it's going to appear like it blinked. That's entirely possible to do. But, you know, it's hard to say if it's constant lighting in the room where the videotape was taken. It kind of, you know, there people could be walking by, there could be shadows, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think there's so many variables. So unless you're there, unless you're the one who filmed it, it's really hard to say. But what I will tell you, the times I've been up there, you see Robert sometimes and he looks like a doll. And I see him sometimes and I think, nope, I'm crazy, there's nothing to him. But then when that spirit does come into him, he does come alive, and it creates the illusion of movement. I mean, looking at him, you will have no doubt that the doll has come alive. As to whether he's actually physically moving, you know, who's to say? But that does make a dramatic change in his eyes. They go from those, his eyes are called shoe button eyes. You know, that was the popular style at the time, but they're very dull and they're very black. And they'll go from these dull black buttons to these gleaming eyes, and it's insane.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, before I really want to, you alluded to this earlier, but there is another theory aside from the voodoo theory about how Robert was made, and I found it really, really fascinating. So you might want to talk about that. not that it makes it any less creepy, but
I think it actually,
it
makes it more creepy.
Yeah.
Would you be referring to his actual birth home and all of that good stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, it was kind of cool. You know, because for years nobody's been able to identify where Robert was from. You know, you figured he had to be homemade. Nobody had seen anything else like him. During my research, God, I must have Googled every combination of every word with doll that you could imagine. And I found a doll that had some similar characteristics. And I started backtracking, and I discovered that Robert was created in Germany. And he was made by the same company who invented the teddy bear. Yeah. They're called the Steiff Company. And when I found this, I mean, I almost couldn't believe it. I contacted Rebecca Kaufman. She's the Steiff expert in the United States. I mean, she has a blog. It's called My Steiff Life, and she knows more about Steiff than anybody in the States. I contacted her to go over some aspects of the doll, and we went back and forth for a while. And you know, she's not one who's willingly just going to say, "Okay, yes, that's a Steiff." But one of the Steiff trademarks was a button in the ear. They'd have a button, it would have an elephant, or it would say Steiff. Since Robert was missing an ear, that's why nobody's ever been able to identify him. He didn't have any other identifying tags. With Rebecca's help, we were able to track down a near similar doll, where we're able to confirm that Robert was created by the Steiff Company. We're able to date him probably to 1904, 1905. You know, there's little gaps there, but everything about him fits. I found records of Jean Otto's mother traveling to Prussia, which, now Germany. I have the shipping records of her going over on the boat, arriving back a couple of months before Jean's birthday and Christmas in 1904. So I believe that she went to the homeland. We have evidence of the Otto family. They're descended from Otto the Great, so they've got royalty from Prussia. But I believe she went to the homeland. There's evidence of them exchanging gifts with people at the homeland, and I believe she sailed back with Robert. And I've got a photograph of the ship that Robert probably sailed back on. But it opens up some crazy things. But here's what's wild too. Rebecca said that the size of Robert is very unique, that he was probably made in the image of someone very wealthy. They said maybe some very wealthy parents would have had it made to look like their child. They said it also could have been created as a display in a window. Jean's father had the pharmacy where, they sold sundries and things like that. So Robert could have been a display. Everything she was saying really tied in. The wild thing, though, Robert's known for his sailor suit now. Mm-hmm. I found out that Robert's original outfit was not a sailor suit. That used to belong to Jean Otto. Robert was created as a clown.
There you see. Now you know why people hate clowns so much. They're too scary.
Yeah. And if you look at Robert, you can...
Go ahead.
If you look at Robert, you can see he can look arms on his suit. It was a harlequin outfit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was thinking that when I got your book, I was looking at the photograph, and it has that, and to really creep people out, folks, it has that poltergeist clown look to it. That
it does have that feel too.
Type of thing, yeah. And you could just see it reaching out for it. Yeah.
The plot thickens. I mean, it's really rather amazing. So many new things that you've uncovered. I mean, if people think that they're going to get your book and just reread everything that you can find on the internet about Robert the Doll, that really is not the truth. You've gone above, beyond, and dug left and right, and have so much new information that it's really, really amazingly good.
Down to the fact that you actually examined it.
Yeah, the museum, the Fort East Martello Museum where the doll is kept, it's operated by the Key West Art and Historical Society, and they run the lighthouse in town. They run the best museums in town, and they were so willing to help me every step of the way with this. They gave me access to all their records. They gave me unrestricted access, and people write these letters. Some of them, some people get locked in their basement and hear giggling. Other people have they've had several deer run in front of their car, like in different places, ranging from when they left Key West and Big Pine to when they got home to Virginia. People talk about being struck by lightning. You have people writing saying, "Hey, listen, this, and this went wrong. I'm sorry I disrespected you." It's insane what happens. But the museum, they're really good stewards of the doll. They protect him. They protect his integrity. Crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I did with the book, a lot of people think, is it all going to be scary stories? It's not written as your typical ghost story. It really is reverse engineering the legends. I wanted to set the record straight with Robert. There's no secret about what's creepy about him. I touch on all of that. There's letters in here. There's actually a letter from President Bush to Robert the Doll wishing him a happy birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Better
be safe than sorry.
Yeah, there's excerpts from the crime report where a woman was arrested and blamed Robert the Doll for a domestic dispute with her husband. But a lot of the articles, people have no idea what Gene Otto looked like, what Ann Otto looked like, what any of the people surrounding Robert really anything about them. I think there's probably 200 articles that are reproduced in here, the old newspaper articles talking about them. We go back to the original source of everything about Robert. We have the burial records for the servants that were associated with the family. There's some pretty crazy information. I had access to the entire Otto family archives. In that I found a photograph of little Gene Otto wearing the sailor suit that Robert wears now. Wow! So we uncovered, we turned over a lot of stones in the process.
Yeah. Now, mediums have tried to contact Robert's spirit, or have they?
Yes.
Yeah. And what are the outcomes for that?
Boy, it's really weird. One of the things that people deal with, when you're dealing with Robert, God, you're dealing with those other entities too, and they try to interfere. I went through some really bad stuff, and I'm not really comfortable talking about it. One of the things that I was told when I was working on the book, I started having big problems, and it was always when I was writing about a certain aspect of it, and that's an aspect that I ended up leaving out of the book. When this started happening, I was attacked by something. I went through a really tough period. If anybody hears it, they think, oh yeah, you're crazy. But I was attacked by some type of spirit. I think it was one of the entities that's there around Robert. I was yanked from my bed. I had things fly at me on the street. I mean, like giant palm fronds that shouldn't be moving on their own. And I had to reach out for help. I put something on Facebook. I said, I'm dealing with an entity that I cannot handle. I need help. And I had some people who reached out to me and were able to help me. But I almost gave up the book. After I lost it the last time, I talked to a local medium. Her name's Beth Rooney. And she went up to the museum with me. And when we were there, I had some very interesting things happen. But Beth ended up telling me, she said, listen, I don't want to freak you out, but you might want to drop this project. If Robert doesn't like the way the book turns out, he's going to give you cancer. So, I mean, there's some really weird stuff, and it's stuff that I normally wouldn't believe. But I gave up the project for over a year because I thought, you know what, it's not worth it. And then I came up with a new way to do it. That book, it was 238 pages. The one that's out, the one that ended up coming out is 160 pages. So there's a lot that was left out, but it still gives everybody the necessary information. I think there are things that Robert or more likely the entities around him just don't want to help.
Now, before we get the heck out of Dodge, because time is getting short, where can people find out about the book and you and your undertakings, for lack of a better word?
If people want to purchase the book, they can buy it direct from me, which is always the best way to go because I can autograph it, personalize it. They can go to robertdidit.com.
Sorry.
Yeah, easy enough. RobertDidIt.com. If people come to Key West, they can hit me up on Facebook. I love to talk with people who are in the paranormal field. They can also reach me through the Ghost Hunt website. It's KeyWestGhostHunt.com.
That's great. I wish we had 2 hours tonight. I really do, because there's just so much more to tell. But thank you for showing up and talking to us about this. And Barbara, you too. So glad you're with me. I mean,
I want to make it someday to talk to Robert.
Yeah, and you should, and I think he'll appreciate you, because he must know by now that, like I said, you're one of his number one fans. That can't be a bad thing.
No, that's always a good thing. And when people approach Robert with the respect, keep in mind he's a good little boy, He's like any little boy. He just wants some love, and then you just got to be aware of that there's other things around there too. So make sure you focus on the doll himself.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the oxymoron. Thank you both, and thank you all. And until next time, everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Martha Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2013. Moonlight Haw by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.